Welcome to this episode of Obsicast. My guest today is Leor Rosman, the founder of Ripples, a psychedelic researcher and a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter. Thank you so much for joining me, Leor.
Thanks for hosting.
It's lovely to have you here. First time I heard you was at Breaking Convention, Europe's biggest psychedelic convention, and your words resonated with me, and they were very close to my heart, and it's something that I've been passionate about for years. And it was then that I realized that you are active in conflict resolution with the help of psychedelics. And you told us a bit about your research in that area. Can you tell us again for those who weren't at the convention?
Sure, yes. So I'm a psychedelic researcher with lots of different background, and my current research is peace building with psychedelics. So I work with groups of Israelis and Palestinians, and I study the potential of psychedelics for peace work, for collective liberation, for healing collective traumas, for building hope, building community, getting out of stuckness, mobilizing. So the kind of intersection of psychedelics and sacred activism, we can say. Yeah.
And you took a group of Palestinian and Israelis to a retreat in Spain.
Right.
And you told us what happened, which I think to begin with is a very brave step, because there's so many generational traumas and pain to put those groups together in a room where they have plant medicine together. That's very brave. And tell us what happened in that.
Wow, yes. So it was with my colleagues, Palestinian and Israeli, also facilitators and activists. It's good to recognize them. So Sami Awad, who is a brilliant peace activist, he was the main facilitator of this group. And Armel Lehman, she's a psychedelic therapist. And Indius Brazil, he's a Brazilian guy who holds ayahuasca spaces. Yeah, and we created a whole program, including this retreat, in which people are coming to do ayahuasca together with a purpose, with a collective intention, and with the purpose of peace building. We invite to that peace activists, artists, people who want to connect, but feel stuckness, feel hopelessness. And want to commune and want to connect in a stronger basis, and also know that there's like certain biases and their histories that they want to heal and repair, and kind of in order to move forward. So we created this very unique program. We had three groups like this. Back then I was in Imperial College London. It was part of my research in Imperial College. And it was very exploratory, like with just the idea of building a collective intention, bringing people together to this space with a political intention. It was very exploratory, and everybody there felt like, okay, we're entering something new. This is like completely pioneering. We're opening up like big doors. We're inviting a lot of energies. There's like a risk involved in doing that. Everybody felt that there's like something new that can emerge from that space. And we had three groups like this in retreats that had a preparation before in the West Bank. They went to refugee camps, they went to a separation wall. It was like grounded in political reality. And then they had an integration after, aimed for creation, for action, and trying to kind of work with the energies of the retreat and try to create from them, or to act from them, or to continue the community that emerged in those. So that was kind of the design of this study. It was like a very piloty, experimental approach to it. Yeah.
And how did it go?
It was very, very powerful. You want me to share stories?
Yes, please.
Straight to the stories.
Straight to the stories.
Great. Yes. So I can tell you the story of the first group, and I'll try to. For me, what I'm interested in is also how these visionary, revelatory experiences are relational. And when we work with the group and when we open the participatory layer in the ceremonies, the visions can come and move from each other, trigger each other, inspire each other, and there is a field that opens in the collective mind that is very relational, right? So this is kind of in the story, I like to try to explain that, right? So we have the first group coming to Spain after doing this preparation in the Holy Land, in the West Bank, in Israel, meeting together, inspiring each other, starting to create also friction in narratives and feeling that. And they arrive together to Spain, and they all feel that they're like entering a new realm. They're excited. We, the facilitators, are excited to kind of embrace them and bring them to this process. And we spent a few days just sharing stories with a kind of intentional practice, sharing a lot of stories, getting reflections, but inviting all the histories, inviting our inspirations, inviting our mentors, inviting where their family comes from, our collective traumas, the Holocaust, the Nakba. All those stories come and reflected on in the group. And for a few days, there's a collective political consciousness that reveals itself to the group. And the group starts having already like its own character before they even enter the first ceremony. And with that, they enter the first ceremony. And the first ceremony, it's in darkness, there's one candle in the middle. And very quickly, a lot of the pains of the past are kind of felt in the experience. There's like a purging, there's ancestors and people's visions. The Nakba arrives in visions. So there's like a feel of heaviness in the room in the first ceremony, first cup. And then Libby, one of the Israeli participants, she goes to pray next to the altar. She prays next to the altar. She prays for the ends of cycles of oppression, the cycles of war. She really feels the kind of relationship between Holocaust to the continuation and how Palestinian people are suffering. And it's kind of like a cycles of trauma that she prays to end. She prays with a song. And it's a prayer for peace. And it's like a very powerful moment in the group. And then it relaxes. But Erez, another Israeli guy, feels uncomfortable in his body. He goes out of the maloka and where everybody are sitting. And he goes out of the maloka and he goes to the forest outside. And he sees a lot of visions. A lot of visions are hitting him from everywhere. And in these visions, he's like saying, okay, I don't want to see all those visions. I came all the way to Spain to feel my pain. It's not for fun here. I don't want the visionary stuff. I want to connect to my pain. And immediately he gets that. He kind of requests it and he gets that. And he sees visions of snakes coming and kind of close to him. But then he gets closer to the ground and he sees a lot of these kind of creepy crawlers coming out of the ground. And the feel of hunger and survival. And he suddenly realizes that he's actually in Eastern Europe, where his ancestors pogroms happened to his ancestors. And he's in Eastern Europe, he's surviving, he's escaping, it's like it stinks in the air from death, and he feels that he's escaping some ineffable evil that is all over. And he gets close to the ground, and he's kind of like really there in the forest in Spain, Eastern Europe, wherever it is, and he crawls close to the ground, and then he arrives to a tree, and he sees a mass grave of his ancestors buried over there. And they're kind of, he communicates with them, and he tells them, come, I'll release you. And they tell him, no, we don't want to release the pain of the past. We belong to here, to the grave. Don't dig the pain of the past. It belongs to the past. There's no need to dig it out. We just want to rest here.
Meaning you should move on.
Move on. Like it's kind of almost a metaphorical, it is what he really sees in his vision. And they tell him that, in telepathy and kind of in the vision. But yeah, it's a metaphorical element of like just,
leave the
past behind, forget about it, kind of, don't dig it. It's way too heavy, it's way too big, it's re-traumatizing if you do, like, just leave us buried here, forget about this. And so he goes back to the maloka, but it's very painful to him, and he's not sure about this vision. He drinks another cup of ayahuasca, so every ceremony has a few cups. And he drinks another cup of ayahuasca, and then he sees a strong vision of soldiers, people hitting him. And they're hitting him, and it resonates with a story that Hassan shared of Israeli soldiers hitting him in the checkpoint. And he's completely in pain. He feels kind of people hitting him all over the body. And he tries to realize who are those people that are hitting him. And it's not clear if they're Jews, if they're Arabs, if they're soldiers, if they're terrorists. It's like it's all getting confused. If they're Nazis, it's all getting kind of mixed. And he looked them in the eyes, and he sees the eyes of his ancestors. And it completely confuses him in the moment. And he just like says, okay, I really don't want to dig the pain of the past. It's way too much. I want the ceremony to stop. And he just relaxes, and the music continues, and there's an Israeli woman, she beats on the drum, and the music kind of continues and relaxes. But there's no resolution for him in that ceremony. And he ends up the ceremony after in an integration session. The day after, the group does integration. We sit outside in the forest, and we share stories from the visions of the experience. And he shares his story. And then one of the Palestinian artists, he invites everybody to paint their experiences. And he paints, Erez paints the mass grave of his ancestors, but he adds this like heart shape, right, coming out of the ground. And it's his way of like adding some humor to the heaviness of the situation. It's like this a Jewish strategy to deal with pain is kind of give a bit of humor to the whole heaviness. Mm-hmm. So he continues with this energy, and he goes to the mass grave, to the tree, and he adds a LED light beam that goes up to the sky from the mass grave. And again, it's like a playful way of dealing with his experience. And the day after is dedicated to the ceremonies in the evening, and it's dedicated to the future. So the first ceremony was dedicated to the past. This ceremony is dedicated to the future. Throughout the day, we do like...
And when you say dedicated, was that an intention, and the facilitators yes. made it clear for the participants that that's what's going to happen on the day?
Okay. Exactly. So if for the first ceremony, we did a lot of few days of sharing stories, by that we invited the past, right? By doing that, we invited the past. Before the second ceremony, we did for each group practices that activate kind of future direction. And each group was a bit different because we asked actually the participants to lead different workshops that are like this. So in that group, there was a Palestinian woman who led an improv workshop that we played and enacted future possibilities in the land, right? Complete destruction and like apocalypse, or we acted like when everything is just beautiful and, you know, the peaceful future. So it was like an improv workshop that is activating a future kind of oriented consciousness in a way. And with each group, we did something else. We were like trying different things. So one group built a portal through which we go to the future. Another group everybody went to the forest by themselves, and we called it activating prophecy. And they just imagine as if they're like a prophet or a revolutionary that kind of seeks the revelation and then write it down. So if you think about a prophet, the prophets are not just people who have experiences, but they share a message from their experience. And the prophetic trajectory, it's like you receive the revelation, but then it creates a sense of mission in you. So you want to speak the truth of the revelation to other people. So we acted that process, and we asked the participants to write a revolutionary text and then act it to the other participants as if they are like a Martin Luther King type person, you know. So they kind of speak in a revolutionary pathos. And it's
Were there any conflict? Because these people have this history of trauma and pain, and they're put together and they're drinking medicine together. Were there any
frictions? Yeah, for sure.
How did that play out?
You mean within the ayahuasca?
During the ceremony, yes.
Yes.
How did that play out?
They can trigger each other's fears. They can trigger each other's anger. They can feel tense. They can feel paranoia, as if like let's say the Jews want to brainwash me, and they can feel all of these feelings. And sometimes they just feel it, and then the day after, people communicate it. But other times we realized when you realize open for that, and open it for that is like a natural process that reveals also the political unconsciousness of the situation, you know. So as an Israeli, I can say, oh, I'm very liberal and I'm not afraid, and, you know, I'm very peaceful. But underneath it, there is a real fear. There is like that is kind of suppressed or denied a bit, you know, and in the psychedelic state, it can bring it into life. But if it's brought into life, then it's something to explore and to sit with and to hold for each other. So I can share like a story from the story from this group. Yeah. So the second ceremony of this group, there was I can briefly kind of just continue with the story of Erez. So Erez, like the second group, future-oriented, starts really beautiful. Everybody feels this like a strong togetherness and serenity, and they're sitting together, and they're like, wow, they're like suddenly in this amazing space in which the peace is felt in the air. And with this like really good energy, Erez goes outside to the forest. He goes visit his ancestors. He invites Antoine, a Palestinian friend. He invites him come to visit the ancestors, and they see the ancestors released through this light beam that he put before, and they kind of support Antoine and Erez together, support the release of the pain of the past. And it's really like a powerful moment for both of them, especially for Erez. He's there on the ground. He's like helping them his ancestors to release, and they go back to the Maloka. Suddenly there's anxiety, and you can imagine there's like a lot of emotions of the collective, and the collective go through like a synchronized process together. So when there is like serenity, it's like a lot of people feel it together. Anxiety, a lot of people feel it together. So he goes back, they drink the second cup, there's anxiety, and then a celebration is invited to kind of release it, and everybody have like Indios, the Brazilian facilitator, takes the guitar out, and they're chanting. We are chanting and singing, and it's like extremely cathartic. And then from this cathartic celebration, joyful, suddenly Hassan wakes up from his moment, and he shouts like very strong, "Khalas!" And he kind of ruptures. There's a real feel of like rupture in the air that is very, very scary. And he shouts it. He loops, "Khalas!" And from the kind of moment of celebration, there's like a shock. And the Israelis are extremely afraid in this moment. So there's like a lot of fear suddenly from violence comes to the space. Hassan, in his vision, he simply sees children hitting each other, two groups of children hitting each other, and he sees them as like he is a big father and they're walking all over his body. That's his like vision, and they're hitting each other, and he shouts at them, and they stop, and then they continue again, and he shouts at them. So his vision is kind of almost unrelated, but because everybody knows the story of how the soldiers hit him, and they heard his story, and they know his trauma. They also see his defenses in some ways as like he have this traumatic story, but as a person, he's very relaxed and very calm and speaks in an extra calm voice. So suddenly when he shouts this khalas, it kind of feels as if this old trauma is rupturing his consciousness. And there is a sense of like, from the Israelis, maybe this is like the revenge is coming now, right? There is like and so Israelis can be afraid, very afraid, even if they admit or not. I think that when Palestinian consciousness is liberated or body is liberated, they would seek revenge. So they would seek the violence. And it's kind of like a fear that exists in society in a way. It's a collective fear that acts out in that moment. So he shouts this. He sees another vision. The Israelis are afraid. One of the Israelis come to me to support, to get my support, and kind of like I just relax her, tell her that everything is good. Antoine and Sami are kind of looking after Hassan's process, and everybody feel that it's like a deep process that kind of came to the group. And in a lot of times, maybe in ceremonies, the facilitators would decide to take this person out because they are disrupting the harmony of the collective process. So a lot of times in psychedelic ceremonies, you want to keep it relatively harmonious because everybody come for their own journey. And if somebody's like this, it can take a long time and it can distract people from their own personal journeys. In that situation, there was a decision to stay with that because this was obviously something that relates to all of us. This anger relates to all of us. The rage relates to all of us. And it's not something that needs to go outside of the Maloka, but it's something to sit with and deal with and work with, So we feel safe, we see that he's going through a deep process, and it might trigger a lot of fears, but these fears are something to work with. So one of the Israeli women, Bar, she takes the drum out and she starts drumming, and we all just sit with Hassan in his process and sit with the anger, and almost the whole group process started to kind of orient to his process and hold him in a way, and not try to kind of ignore it and go through our own thing, but just to hold him for a moment because it's deep and meaningful and relates to everybody. So this was is an example of how to deal with the friction, is to give it the space and see it as like a natural thing. Yeah.
How did you convince these people to come to this experience? And I can't imagine that everyone would be open to this experience. So I think I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these people had already done a bit of work on themselves. They were interested in sitting in a ceremony with Israelis or Israelis who were open to sitting in ceremony with Palestinians. So
Yes.
the difficulty will be getting people who are not open to that possibility involved in a process like this.
Yes, so we start with the ones who want, right? And it's kind of like every radical idea starts with a more, with a wilder kind of type of people, right? So the screening process for these people who were invited for that was that they have experience with ayahuasca. They don't come for personal therapy, and the facilitators, Armel and Sami, kind of screen them to make sure that they don't have a lot of personal process, because we're not sure that this container was a healthy one for if people have a lot of personal process to deal with. And because there was a lot of novelty, we wanted to be very safe in who we invite into this, right? Because we know that like opening up the political realm into and bringing the friction into life in that space, there's a risk involved, and we want people who kind of know how to handle the situation, at least for these first groups. And the people who wanted to join that, so from the Israeli side, it was easy. Like, it was really easy. There are lots of Israelis that you just tell them, and there's a lot of like ayahuasca and psychedelics in Israel. It's like very popular, and it was quite easy to find people, just like word of mouth. From the Palestinian side, Sami is very connected to a lot of like a big community in West Bank that is interested, and it's through his kind of leadership skills that it opened up kind of the trust for people to join that space. And also before this project, me and Antoine and another Natalie Ginsberg, she's American, we did a road trip all over Israel, Palestine, from the river to the sea. We interviewed a lot of people Israelis and Palestinians who drink ayahuasca. So it were 33 interviews. It was like an ethnographic research that started this project. And through there, we already got connected deeply. The interviews were very deep and meaningful. It was a qualitative research. It was a scientific project, but it was like almost every interview I cried, and every interview just like opened a lot of emotions. And through there, we already started kind of getting into the mycelium of the kind of underground scene and the different activist scene, and finding those activists who seek spirituality and kind of try to work in these two realms of spirituality and activists. So those who kind of interested in that intersection, we started connecting to them in that road trip.
And how did it go by the end? So you told us about the first day and the second day, and how did it end?
For this group, the second group, like after this process, it continued, and the night ended. The night ended very beautifully, like sitting around the fire, playing music. The day after, everybody felt like very empowered and connected. And something was quite common across each group is the sense of like kinship, right? So this kind of, and it's almost like a cliche, like to say the word family to your ayahuasca tribe also, right? But there is, I think the cliche speaks to some truth about that. When you go through such intense processes with emotional processes with people, there's a sense of almost kinship that is developed. So even now, if you're like, meet that person 2 years later, you have a type of relationship as if it's like a cousin that you didn't see for a long time. And you're like, you went to that process together that like was very explosive and like emotionally intense, and it's imprinted. Like relationship is kind of imprinted in a certain way, then that's different than other type of activities, and so this sense of kinship is very strong at the moment. And integration circles, and then there was a day for commitments. So the last day, everybody spoke about their commitments to themselves, to their community, to their nation, to the project. And everybody felt like very empowered and connected and loving, right? Like a lot of love, a lot of like softness, and a lot of feeling of power, of like, we can change. This definitely was the feeling in all three groups. All three groups went through a different process, but all of them in the last day felt this kind of kinship and empowerment and community and strength to now change and do things. So that was how every group ended. Then returning to reality is not simple, right? So we did an integration gathering for the 3 groups together, coming for 3 days to the West Bank to we found our retreat place in the desert. And already there, it was obvious that returning after this moment full of hope and transcendence and connection and liberation to reality that is oppressive and alienating, and the architecture of separation is so strong in the land that it's really hard to maintain the hope. And for some people, the ones who succeed in staying in community, the ones who succeed in staying in creation, the ones who succeed to staying in action, the hope, the moment of that kind of transcendence makes sense because they manage to ripple it into reality. But for those who didn't manage to ripple it, that they had just this event in their life that is suddenly just this kind of dream that was in the past, but has nothing to do with their day-to-day life. For those, it could have been challenging, So if you bring hope very high, you open the option for despair as well, because sometimes our small, just getting in with reality and not trying to build hope too much is also protecting us from too much emotional engagement with things, right? So for some individuals, not many, that was a challenge to return, but everybody were connected to them and taking care of them, and it was a process that the whole group went together and was supporting these individuals in their return. In reality, the way we created the program, we didn't put enough energy on the integration planning, in a sense that we didn't plan what are the resources, what are the community structure that is needed to return into the land. So there was a lot of enthusiasm that didn't find an outlet,
yeah.
right? So, which is okay. Right now in future projects, this definitely we're going to put much more intention on that. What did happen that sometimes the outlet just took a long time. There was an outlet. There was a festival that was created by a few of them, and they all volunteered doing workshops. There's an Israeli and Palestinian musicians that started working together. But for the Palestinian, the BDS would say, no, you cannot create with an Israeli. If the label of the Palestinian musician said, you cannot create with Israeli because we will boycott, we will kick you off our label, so you might lose your job. So the architecture of separation, all the forces that separate, whether they're geographical, whether they are walls, whether it's a boycott, that's also something that for Palestinians can separate from, if they want to connect to the Israelis, it kind of pulls them back. All of these energies are hard, and they're a lot to hold, and they're very strong. And sometimes fighting them is really hard, right? So, and sometimes it's very slow. It's just 2 years after, suddenly something happens because this family is just connected forever. So suddenly the ripple happens 2 years after. So ripples.
Yeah, I was going to answer. Out of that came Ripples, exactly. Ripples Collective was born out of that.
Exactly, yeah. So now I'm opening a nonprofit, Ripples, to continue this type of work and to put a lot of intention for the return from. So we have the event, the transformative event, and then there's the return. And the return, the friction is the creative force. So the tension between the dream that is open, the process that is open, and the reality. If you manage to just bring a bit of that dream back into reality, this is it's a healthy process for individuals. So being in the flow of creation, being in the action, even if it's something that is small, but it makes sense for a person. Whenever they don't do, whenever there's impulsivity and reality wins, then is where the kind of depression and the despair come. And when the creation happens, people feel in the movement of things. That's where it's healthy. So with Ripples, the nonprofit, the intention is to pay attention to that and plan it, resource that process as well. And Ripples Collective is a performance group that from the participants from this project, so the Spain project was two and a half years ago, and suddenly there's this performance group that was created a few months ago for Medicine Festival in the UK, and we few individuals were invited to give a workshop and give a talk there. This was Suli and Hanin, and then I was invited, and then we came up, okay, let's invite also the musicians and let's kind of create something bigger. And we created this, what we call a collective liberation ritual. And it's a process that in a way translates our shared process in Spain, our relationships, and in a way somehow translate them artistically and tries to bring an audience to the depth of our shared work and the intimacy of our relationship.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to
exactly,
see
exactly.
some of them. Leor, what is it about psychedelics that makes you think about peace? Because every time I've had a psychedelic journey, I have thought about politicians. I thought, oh, I wish I could give this to Putin. Exactly. I wish I could give this to the Iranian leader, supreme leader Ali Khamenei, because I thought if people have this experience, then they can't kill and they can't be violent. Why is that? What happens in that experience that makes you want to give this to bad people with the hope that they become good?
Yeah, exactly. So what in the experience for us, right? It's like, because it's in a way I've got this question like, how did you come up with this idea? And like my usual answer is like, I didn't come up with this idea. You came up with this idea. You came up with this idea. You know, there's something in the experience that makes a lot of people come up with this idea, and we're just trying to manifest it and it's a good question. I have speculations of what in the experience can lead people to contemplate this idea. I think psychedelics, there are few experiences that there's the experience of connection that is very strong a lot of times, and when you feel it's a larger potential, and you try to imagine the kind of larger potential of it. There's this experience of liberation as well that is common in psychedelics. So if you see about like across different psychedelic practices, whether it's a therapy, whether it's a rave, whether it is a ritual, that you go there to free yourself from certain constraints in order to, if you're in therapy, in order to receive new insight. If you're in a rave, it's in order to dance and feel free in the dance floor. If you're in a ritual, it's like maybe free yourself to receive certain again, religious insights or connections, or to commune with the people. And I think this also experience of liberation, once we feel liberated from whatever constraining us, to cultural programming or historical traumas that feel that they're as if they're oppressing us, and we feel this moment of like we're free from them. I think also that moment, the joy of that moment can also make you contemplate, oh, if everybody just had it, all those leaders that are kind of, we see them and they feel that they're also in a way part of the kind of brainwashing machine, but they're also in themselves are kind of programmed already in some ways, that if they just have those experiences, they might see the world differently, right? This is
but then I heard from you that it's not always the case.
So this is not always the case.
Exactly, yes, and that shocked me. It shocked me when I heard that you said some settlers have ceremonies, they drink ayahuasca, and they feel more righteous about the land rather than feeling more loving and understanding of the other side of the story. That really shocked me. And what happens in those ceremonies that is different from other ceremonies that we have experienced?
Yes, I have a few answers, right? One answer is saying simply, we might have those experiences, but then we return to a reality, and consciousness of reality is just stronger. And then we reshift the meaning of this experience to, we change them in order to feel more comfortable in the reality we live in, right? So we might have a strong insights about how all, I'll take something much more easy to digest, but we might have a beautiful experience about life and the animals and nature, and then we come back and we're still eating meat.
No,
right?
I became a vegetarian after my first ayahuasca.
But there are a lot of psychedelic people who still eat meat. So we have those insights and the moments. We return and we just decide not to follow them in some ways, right? Or we forget them, right? Or we just compromise because the structure of reality is so strong, and it's and that we cannot really live like we cannot really walk our talk always, right? We have values and ideas, but in the day-to-day, it's really hard to implement them. This is one simple answer. The other answer is that in very homogeneous groups, I think the feeling of universality is limited to this group, right? So let's say if a group of settlers drink together ayahuasca and they feel this connection, human connection and bond within that group, it doesn't necessarily translate to outside, especially when the outside is dehumanized, right? So the connection is just with humans. They're not humans. They're not part. The connection, the humans, even family, is just your in-group in a way, kind of, right? If the other is dehumanized, so the feeling of universality doesn't necessarily translate outside of your kind of homogeneous group. The feeling of connection to the land can be like can be serving a nationalistic, agenda. So if you go to ayahuasca ceremony and suddenly you connect with your indigenous ancestry, and let's say you even in England, drinking ayahuasca in England can connect you to the indigenous of this land, the history of this land, the ancestry of this land. If you do it as a Jewish in Israel or as a Palestinian in Israel, it can connect you to certain ancestry. But this can be in service of nationalistic ideologies as well. So if you're a Jewish person and you connect in your visions and to the land to biblical stories and prophets, you might then go back and translate it and say, oh, I'm actually more indigenous than Palestinians, we're way before them. We're the actual indigenous, and they're not indigenous. We just, kind of liberate the land. Like Jewish settler idea is that Jewish settlers liberate the land from the occupiers of it, which are the Palestinians, right? So it can serve these ideologies when they're not really challenged within a very homogeneous situation. So the universality doesn't really translate to a real universality. The connection to land can become something that is exclusive, and we humans, we have a lot of tricks to
True. It actually means that there's no magical solution, even though we call them magic mushrooms or ayahuasca. It's not going to solve the problem unless
it's up to us.
It's treated properly,
exactly.
and there's a level of consciousness and openness to finding a resolution.
Exactly. And if you imagine the project we do with Ripples or the previous project, it's not just a project about ayahuasca or psychedelics, it's a project about context. And we do a very elaborate thinking about what is the context in which we work with those substances. We were really putting a lot of effort in creating the context that, in that context, these experiences can have impact. But it doesn't mean that other contexts necessarily would just like we can expect to do them in every other context, and they would like bring peace on earth, kind of, if just everybody did it. Maybe, but I don't think. I think they're very context-dependent psychedelics, and
which brings us back to the golden set and setting rule.
Set and setting,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
So you mentioned Ripples Collective, which is kind of your child. What next for it? You had your first performance in London at the end of 2024. Where do you see it going from here?
So yes, so Ripples Collective is a co-creation. So Ripples, the nonprofit, I feel very like my child. Ripples Collective, the performance group, it is a very co-created project, and
which for the listeners or viewers, it's good to explain what happens there. There are Palestinian and Israeli.
Palestinians, we're right now 4 Palestinians, 3 Israelis. We all journey together, but the creative process in which we decide how we perform is very horizontal. All the voices there are quite strong. Everybody are like really talented, with lots of impact, with lots of history, with lots of skills. They're like facilitators, musicians, activists, that are very skillful. So the performance is built from our relationships, and we kind of really work together, also with friction, to figure out what we want to take the audience to into a process. So we had the Medicine Festival was the first one. Then we had in London recently, that you were there as well, and that was like our test run. Like festival was like, wow, amazing, this is something here is powerful, let's see if it works now in the city. And we did it in London,
and it did, and it was sold out, and I was messenger, anyway, you can have one more ticket.
Yeah.
Said no.
Exactly. And we were like amazed, and the energy was good, but we still need to improve it, right? We're like we need to improve it theatrically, we need to work with it, refine it. So we're planning now to refine it. But we know that there's such a huge potential in this. You know, in our imagination, we hope to, in our goals, our intention is to now fundraise for this in order to refine it, work with maybe like a dramatologist or work with people from theater to help us to kind of create like a proper performance out of this, and sit for a few more weeks together and jam together. We jammed at your house. That was like a way we refined this, and then take it on a tour. What we imagine, like taking it on a tour, is that it does something to the audience. So when Israelis and Palestinian audiences come to the same space, and in the performance in London, we felt that we can improve in that, but we managed to bring kind of different audiences together. We feel it can bring a new message of collective liberation in the land. It can activate a certain vision, inspire a certain vision that we really wish to, after we do a tour, let's say in Europe or in the US, and develop this kind of courage. Every time we work with audience, it's like we're not sure how it's so in a kind of small baby steps kind of part of the process. And every time we work with audience and we feel that we inspire other people, that builds the courage in us. So right now we're not courageous enough to take it to our home, right? But after a few shows in Europe and in the US, we'll be courageous enough to take it to our home. And there we imagine like this kind of, we travel in a bus and activate a certain energy, right? And just like travel for a few months in a bus, do performance in different communities.
I hope I can be there.
That
I want to see
great,
that
one. But now we're fundraising.
How I received it as a participant. To me, it was very ceremonial. It was like a ceremony without any plant medicine, of course. But it brought people together in love. For me, seeing Palestinian and Israeli artists singing sometimes the same lyrics, but in Arabic and Hebrew together. And the fact that everything that is happening outside that room is happening, but these individuals are able to sit together and connect in love and play music and cry together was healing.
Yeah.
And you know, for us in Obsidiana, we say love is the medicine.
Right. Yeah.
And in fact, when we went to my house and I looked around and I thought, if somebody watches the news, they'd think, oh, the Iranians and the Palestinians and the Israelis, they all want to kill each other. But there we were, eating together, dancing together, singing together, and feeling the love.
Yeah.
And that is Ripples Collective for me.
Yeah, for sure.
That love that you guys have experienced and can live will bring people to Ripples Collective, because they can see that possibility. And that's why I see a lot of promise in it. And that's why I would like to support it in however way I can. Yeah.
Yeah, we get this feedback a lot, that it's almost a relationship translate into performance, and people want to know how the hell we got into what we are, you know? People were like, how they even do that, you know, like surprised by the intimacy and the relationship. So yes, it's kind of like, it is bringing that frequency, and hope that it can inspire other people.
Because I think there's something, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's something about the medicine and being in ceremony together that liberates you from that generational trauma and all the ancestors who are actually telling you, move on, leave us here, there's life after us and there's love after us. And to fight each other over a piece of land, over a piece of ideology, that's a distraction. This is not what we're meant to do. We're meant to feel the love and coexist and build rather than destruct and destroy and kill and use violence against each other. And that's the beauty of the medicine that can potentially, as you mentioned, it can go wrong, but it has the capacity of opening our hearts and allowing us to see each other in that place of love rather than anything else.
I agree, for sure. And even, I described even processes of anger, right? So a lot of times anger is kind of considered this emotion that we don't want to have. That is like so in the relationship between activists and kind of spiritual people, a lot of time anger is an emotion that is like, from the spiritual people would say, no, you shouldn't be angry, as if it's like a toxic emotion in a way. And the activists, they're holding the kind of, who hold very strongly the resistance frequency. Anger is like the liberatory energy, actually, right? So in sacred activism, there's a lot of space, I think, for anger, in a sense that anger comes from the lack of love, from the injustice or the oppression and the wanting to liberate. But in what we imagine is that we actually want to liberate to something that is loving, that is equal, that is just, right? So when I see anger, and also in the previous work, in the ethnographic work, when I heard stories of like revelatory moments that also trigger anger, and the anger is an energy that wants to change and bring people in a sense of mission. The anger is because there's a lack of love. So in our process, we also want to work with that, but in a way that the love is holding and the compassion is holding, and we can say things which are uncomfortable, and we can say kind of true to power. We can hold still the activist kind of spirit within a very loving container and compassionate container. In that sense, you don't like necessarily just like try to constantly shame and like kind of bring down your opponent, but you see that there might be dark sides in each other, but there's also like a compassion that holds people together in a process of collective liberation that wishes for everybody to eventually be in a state of equality and love.
But you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking once we publish this episode, we will come under attack.
Of course.
We will be accused of whitewashing. In fact, when I sent the announcement of your event to some of my friends, they said, absolutely not, this is whitewashing. This is ignoring what's going on in Gaza. How can you get involved with anything like this? Yeah. And I understand their point of view as well, because to the rest of the world, we might look like some lovey-dovey people who are sitting here talking about love, making music with each other, while all the horrible things are happening on the ground. Yeah. And how do you think we can overcome that?
So I think in the performance there is like speaking that, right, and calling for ceasefire. And ceasefire in Gaza right now is the most crucial, immediate thing to work towards, right? And it's more crucial than, I agree that it's more crucial than visioning and planning what happens after. There's, first of all, you stop. Like whatever horrible act is happening now, you first of all stop. And we try to call for that as well in our performance and in the energy we bring, and it's an important part, and we agree with that, right? But we also want to, in the same time, envision the shared future and see that the violent energy is feeding into the cycles of war. And indeed, Palestinians are oppressed in the situation. There's asymmetry of power, but there are also cycles of violence that feed into that war. There is a lot of fear from the Israelis that they're constantly in this kind of survival mode that makes the kind of Israeli mind more vicious, more aggressive. And the way for collective liberation is to work with the stop it now, ceasefire, anger, definitely need all of those, and need to reveal the potential future and the love and the vision and the hope. Because if you don't have that, the Israeli mind would stay in a survival existential, and this is a thought, it will stay in a survival and existential mode that feeds into the kind of vicious part of that consciousness, and used by the more radical sides in Israeli society to mobilize people towards them, right? So there are sides of Israeli society that succeed to mobilize mainstream Israeli society towards them that doesn't necessarily belong over there, but they're mobilized by fear, by existential threats, by histories of violence, you know. So I think that both of those things need space, and I think that there is place for revealing potential future, but in a way that doesn't normalize the current situation and kind of still speaks against the current situation, but also starts looking at what is potential to move towards. Yeah.
But anyway, we have to be prepared.
For the attacks, yeah, sure. But you know,
I think
my experience is that it's very natural for people to attack. They attack the first image they have in mind. If they engage with the thing, if they come to the performance, if they engage with some of the material, with things that we write, some of the academic output, then they're like, okay, it's not exactly what I thought. And then they might be open, and they still be critical. For me, it's hard when people are critical. I mean, it's
without seeing. That's what I keep telling people. I keep telling people it's something you have to experience. Don't write everything off, because that's prejudice.
Exactly, and there's a lot of that. Yeah.
Exactly. You just have to go and experience it and then decide for yourself. But we are living in that reality. Well, I think we're living in our reality, but then we have to find ways to deal with that reality as well, which is difficult. Exactly. I like to end this episode. That's my plan, to ask all my guests, what is the truth for you? What is the ultimate truth?
Well, I don't think I have a good answer for this. I will give an answer which might be philosophical and not easily grasped, but I see, and I'm influenced by a certain philosopher that sees truth as that. But I see truth as something that is not exactly a thing, but more a process. And it's a process, and it relates to the process of liberation. So whenever our structure of reality confines us with certain, and it's natural, we're humans, we construct a lot of things. Sometimes we have glimpses of things which are beyond our structure of reality, and they direct us towards a changing of the structure. They kind of point to something that needs to change. And in the process of bringing that kind of vague thing into our structure, and it's almost like a liberatory process that we try to change our structure of reality in order to include something new. The process of liberation is a process of truth, and therefore it's always liberation from what? And it's always truth is therefore more of a process than an actual thing.
Destination.
And then the destination, and the process is a liberatory process. So this is a very vague philosophical answer.
Because I'm very occupied with the truth and the reality and what we are experiencing as the human experience at the moment. So I would like to hear.
So I give an example that a moment of spontaneous revolution, when people are in the street and suddenly there's this excitement and hope, it's this wow, there's like suddenly, those kind of in history, there's those moments. They're very much similar to the moment of like falling in love. That suddenly something completely new shifts our way of being. It can be similar to a eureka moment of a scientist that suddenly they realize something that's outside of the regular theory, or the illumination moment of an artist that suddenly they break through from their own discipline and genre. And these moments, I think they have hints of truth. So what is similar between falling in love and a revolutionary moment is that they reveal to us something universal about the human spirit, and they direct us to a certain direction. And their truth is somewhere there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry I surprised you with that question. I should have told you before, good. So you had time to think about it. Leor Rosman, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you.
Yeah.